So here we're looking at solving quadratic equations in standard form when a equals 0. So in other words, when this term here is just a 1. So here's an example below. We have x squared plus 7x plus 12. And what we want to do is we want to try to write this in factored form. And not all quadratics can be factored, but the ones that we'll be looking at in this video can all be factored. This factors into x plus 3 times the quantity of x plus 4 equals 0. I can see that x times x will give me x squared. X times 4 gives me a 4x. But then I have this x times a 3, which gives me the rest to make up my 7x. 3 times 4 gives me my 12. And you probably remember from when you learned this in class that 3 times 4 equals 12. These two numbers, the product should always equal this last number, but then the sum should equal this number. Once you have it in factored form, it's easy to solve. Either x plus 3 equals 0 or x plus 4 equals 0. So you have x equals negative 3 or x equals negative 4. So here we're purposely looking at a very similar one. The only thing that's changed is the sign for my b value. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together and give me 12. I have plenty of options, but they need to add together and give me a negative 7. And so once you introduce a negative sign either here or here, you have to do a little bit more thinking because it's not just positive 3 or positive 4. You have to consider negative 3 and negative 4. The nice thing is, since the last number is the product, we have to look for two things that multiply together and give me positive 12. The only way that can happen is if they're both positive like we saw in the first example, or if they're both negative. So in this case, I need two numbers that multiply together and give me a positive 12 and add to give me a negative 7. That's kind of my indicator that both of these have to be negative. And in this case, especially since we just did the other example, we know that it's going to be x minus 3 times quantity x minus 4. Negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. Negative 3 plus a negative 4 gives me negative 7. So I know that I'm going to have the right answer there. I get x minus 3 equals 0, so just x equals 3. X minus 4 equals 0, or you could even just say x minus 4. Once you get a little more familiar with them, you can just jump to the answer after you have it in factored form. Now in this situation, we have an expression that's equal to 0, x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0, but we have two negatives here. So if I'm multiplying together two numbers and getting a negative, that means that one's positive and one's negative. So I know right away it's going to be x plus something and x minus something. And then I need two numbers that multiply together and give me 10. So I have a couple options here. I could choose 1 and 10, or I can choose 2 and 5. But since this is a negative, I have to consider that it could be negative 1 and 10, or it could even be 1 and negative 10. Likewise, it could be negative 2 and 5, or 2 and negative 5. Then I have to look to see what adds up to give me a negative 3, because any of these right now are going to multiply together to give me negative 10. Well, this adds to 11, adds to 7. This adds to a positive 3. And as long as it's the same number but an opposite sign, you know you're on the right track. So I'm going to go to this one, which is switched. This added together gives me a negative 3, so I know that that's what my factor is. It's x plus 2 times quantity x minus 5 equals 0. So x equals negative 2 or x equals 5. And for a final example, we can look at x squared plus 4x minus 5 is equal to 0. So I'm going to start in the same place. I'm going to look for factors of 5. Luckily 5 is prime, so it makes it quite easy because you can only have 5 and 1 as the factors. But since we have a negative, it could be negative 1 and 5, or it could be 1 and negative 5. Since we started making sure that these multiply together and give me negative 5, I just have to look to see which pair adds to give me a positive 4. And in this case, it's the first one. So I can factor this into x minus 1 times the quantity x plus 5 equals 0. So x equals 1 or x equals negative 5. Now, believe it or not, if the a value is equal to 1, these are the only types that you're going to have. And so let me show you how I've divided this video. You'll notice that our first set of problems here is where we end in a plus sign. And anytime that our C value is positive, anytime that C is positive, notice that the two numbers have to multiply together and give me a positive number, meaning the signs must both be positive or both be negative. And so it's good to start looking at these patterns. If the C value is positive, my signs have to be the same. But in our other example, where we saw the negative values, if our C value is negative, then what we notice is the only way to get that product of a negative number is if one is positive and one is negative. Okay, and then the same thing obviously in this example. As you brainstorm the factors, if you're trying to figure out which one should be positive and which one should be negative, of course you can list out all the factors like we did, but sometimes it's not practical. Another tip is if this expression, or in other words, the B value is negative, then you know that the larger of the two numbers must have been negative, right? Because when you add them together, you ended up with something negative. Likewise, in this situation, it's positive, so you know the larger of the two numbers must have been positive. Otherwise, when you add those two numbers together, you would have gotten a negative. So that's just another tip so that you can fill out your factors a little bit faster.